when we do the lightning round at the end.
Welcome, everyone. So welcome to Consciousness Hacking. My name is Mikey. How many people are here for the first time? Cool. Okay, that's great. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'll begin with a really, really short overview of the idea behind the meetups and what we're doing here and what kind of the point of all of this is. And then I'll give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today, and then we'll move on with the rest of the meetup. So consciousness hacking started about a year ago, and it was, I guess, born out of really my own recognition of something that was missing. In my own life, I had a background as an engineer and was doing computer engineering and robotics and working in Silicon Valley and doing all of that stuff. And then on this other side, this other part of my life, I had this deep and growing interest in things like meditation and well-being and exploration of consciousness and psychedelics and all kinds of things like that. And really what it was at its heart was an exploration into human well-being, into meaning of life, of existence, of how to actually be content and okay with our experience as it is right now, finding that sense of happiness and joy. And they were very separate. And what became clear over time was that separation was actually artificial. I saw that the technology that I was using every day was actually in this conflict, in this tension with my own pursuit of well-being. So on one hand, let's say I was into meditation, I'd have to kind of unplug from my technology and kind of resist the urge to get on Facebook or do these sort of semi-addictive technology habits, and then I'd sort of get on the cushion and I'd be meditating, or some version of that, where it was this back and forth, and the two were really incompatible, like oil and water. And what I saw was that actually this was a very, very, very narrow view or manifestation of technology. That actually technology had no real limits, no real boundaries. It really was just something that we create as humans. It could be a stone tool, it could be an iPhone, it could be a Mars rover. Really, technology can be anything. And what I realized was that technology could, at a very, very, very deep level, be in service to human well-being in the deepest way. In the same way that, for example, Eastern traditions or meditation practices or even Western psychology is at its heart in service to helping us to feel more at ease, to find a deeper sense of peace, technology could be doing the same thing. And so when I looked to begin kind of pursuing that path, what I saw was there was no one to be found. Really, it was very difficult to find anyone to connect with around that same idea. And so even though I was beginning to build my own devices and build my own technologies and do that kind of stuff, what I realized is what was really needed was a community of people that could gather around and share and express and cultivate this same idea, because I saw that it really was just the seed of an idea, and what was needed was a community to help it grow so that we could bring these technologies into the world, so that we could accelerate the process and the evolution of human experience and human consciousness, and really address a lot of the surface level problems that we see in the world from sort of an inside out approach. And so that's the idea of consciousness hacking, a community built around that general space of ideas. And so we have a meetup here in San Francisco. We have one in Palo Alto. We also have one in New York City. Toronto meetup just started this month. And then we have a Vienna, Austria meetup, which is in the works right now as well. So we have some like momentum gaining, and it's pretty exciting. And so the So the heart of it is you guys. So thank you guys for being here. So I'm now going to do a quick overview of the format for the meetup. So the first stage of the meetup is me talking about the meetup. And then after that, we're going to move into our speaker, Vince Horn, and I'm going to do a little intro for him. And then after that, after Vince gives his talk, we're going to do a Q&A, which is going to be partially us going back and forth, and then it's going to be really interactive. So people are going to have an opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation with Vince and I and each other. And then after that, I'm not sure if it's still happening. We may have a demo. I'm not going to promise anything because I'm not seeing them. And then we're going to do something called the lightning round. And the lightning round is an opportunity for people from the community to come up and take the mic for 2 minutes. And I have like a timer and one of those hooks that I pull people off stage with. And you have a chance to essentially talk about anything that you want for 2 minutes. So if you have a project that you want people to help you with, if you have an idea you want to discuss with people, if you have a particular skill and you want to just work on something cool, you can talk about your skill set. Or if you're just new to the community and you want to introduce yourself and say hello, anything's open. And so for that, what we're going to do is we're going to line up over on that side of the room that I just pointed at, and then we'll kind of do 2-minute rounds, and then we'll have some announcements, and that's the end of the meetup. And at the end of the meetup, we'll have at least an hour for people to kind of schmooze and get to know each other and do all that kind of stuff. So, are there any questions or anything like that? Cool. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce a really close friend of mine, Vince Horn, who he's actually been staying at my cabin for the last few days in Santa Cruz. So we've had a really good chance to kind of catch up and go deep on a lot of things. And every time we sit down to talk, I'm just continually impressed by not just his depth in terms of his intelligence, but his depth in terms of his heart. His heart is, and his sense of ethics, his sense of purpose is really profound. And what's come out of that is a number of things. The thing that's most impacted me is a project that he created called Buddhist Geeks. And Buddhist Geeks is much bigger than just a bunch of Buddhists hanging around talking about geeky things. Buddhist Geeks was really one of the most important, if not only, efforts that I know of to bring the ideas around meditation and traditional practice truly into a modern context. And he has a podcast that is now has hundreds of episodes. He's interviewed some of the most important thinkers and teachers, both on the spiritual side across traditions, not just to Buddhism, on the scientific side, from researchers, neuroscientists, to the technology side, people that have started companies and created technologies in this space that are relevant. And when I first started off in this space, Buddhist Geeks was the main resource, and still is, to learn about this stuff. And so there are a few people in the world that have thought more about this space and talked to more people in this space than Vincent Horn. So we're really lucky to have him. So I'd like to invite my friend Vince up to the stage.
Thanks, Mikey. Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Good to be here with you. So I was thinking, being a Buddhist geek, among other things, that maybe we could start today actually with a little short meditation session. So if you're up for that, I see everyone getting into the start position. What position do you need to be in to meditate? As a koan for you. Okay, so we'll just do something short. And how many people here have meditated before? Maybe raise your hand. Okay, so most everyone. I could tell with the starting position movement, but just checking. And how many people would you say have like a regular practice where you're practicing most days? Okay, wow, impressive. Some discipline in the room. Good. So I just want to invite us all to just sit for about 10 minutes or so, and I'm just going to offer some initial instructions since you all already know what you're doing. And that is basically, this is what I do these days. I basically sit, I find a posture where I can feel very comfortable, see if you can get in a place where you're both upright and also relaxed and at ease. And then allow your attention to drop into your body. So for me, when I work all day, looking at screens, thinking a lot, it tends to be located in the head, my attention. So if you're like me, it can be helpful to drop, settling down, maybe into the abdomen, maybe suffusing your whole body with awareness. And let's just rest for a few minutes, allowing our attention to be embodied. Just breathing, being, allowing the wisdom of the body to direct things. See if you can notice the stillness in the room, stillness in your mind and your body, however much that's present. And then notice the movement, the activity of body, mind, sound, experience. Tuning into that aspect of experience. Now see if you can hold both stillness and movement at once in your awareness, making room for both activities. Stillness moving, movement stilling, all happening right now in this awareness. Nothing left out. Okay, so let's switch out of this from stillness to movement. And I'm going to talk at you for a little while, and hopefully some of these words will be interesting and or useful. If they're not, please feel free to let them go. And what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about a new project that I'm working on, but not so much the project as much as the ideas and the questions that I'm wrestling with as I work on it, because they're really related to this whole question of consciousness hacking. And maybe I'll just say a little bit more about myself. Mikey mentioned Buddhist Geeks. That's a project I started when I was in college at a university called Naropa. It's one of the few Buddhist universities in America. We called it the Harvard of Buddhist colleges because it's like the only one. And while I was there, I started Buddhist Geeks. It became something that's been ongoing since that time, about 8 years now. And also during that time, I was, like many of you here, meditating like a fiend. I'd actually dropped out of an engineering program to meditate full-time. Then my wife said, hey, you really ought to consider this university where you could get your degree and meditate. So thank God that she was in my life. And during that time of really, I guess basically my 20s, I was going on retreats, meditating, full-time during that time. I did about a year of retreat practice in my 20s, which is not a lot when you hang around the meditation scene. Some people spend years doing this. But it was enough to get a sense for what this practice was about, what some of these traditions were about, where they were pointing, how profound the inner kind of technologies of transforming consciousness are. And so for me, I've been trying to really integrate that understanding into what's happening right now in the world. What's happening with the rise of the internet, with the digital age, as everything is changing so rapidly. I mean, the Buddhists talk about change, but I don't think they could have ever imagined the kind of change that we're dealing with. It's not just that things are changing. It's like whole things that we used to, hold on to as traditions are also changing right underneath our feet. And so where do we stand? How do we work with this change in a way that's sane? So that's one of the questions that I'm kind of asking myself and asking through this project that I'm going to talk a bit about. So this is a picture I found. I really liked it. And what I'm really wanting to explore is what does it mean to meditate in the digital age? What does the contemplative path look like in the 21st century, and how do we want it to look like? How are we actually shaping it? So my response to this is right now a new project called Mind Training IO. And again, I'm not going to talk about the project so much as talk about some of the things that I'm considering or that are influencing my work on it. And these are trends, ideas, patterns, I guess you could say, things that I've noticed while doing the Buddhist Geeks project, while talking to a lot of different folks, getting different perspectives, trying to hold all of them in my mind at once without, killing myself or just blowing up, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. And I want to start by sort of framing how I'm thinking about meditation in terms of how I learned it. So lately I've been thinking about the training that I did as the industrial meditation complex. So if you think of the industrial complex, right, in the 20th century, meditation really took hold here in the United States, across the West. And the way it was transmitted was not the old monastic system, right? The monastic system is its own thing, which I won't get into. But the way it was transmitted into the West was through a bunch of young folks who went to India. Some of them had, tripped acid, done psilocybin, saw this whole reality that they didn't realize was possible. Not all of them, but many of them did. And then went to India trying to figure out what is this thing about. This is a picture, obviously, of a person in India meditating on the Ganges. And the way I'm sort of looking at this is that these people brought this back and they shared it in the way that made sense at the time, which is that they copied the industrial model. They said, how are we going to teach and share what we've learned with as many people as possible? Well, let's create retreat centers. Let's create these places where people can come and meditate, where 100 people or more can come and get instructions and practice. This is how I did it. I don't know, how many of you have done retreat practice, have gone on retreat? Okay, so it's usually pretty big. Not all of them are like that, but many. And what ends up happening is the teachers, in a way, become like the middle managers, right? So they're all kind of managing things, responding to questions. You've got a kind of typical top-down management structure, right? The teachers, kind of know what's going on, and they give the instructions, answer questions. And then you've got, us as the practitioners, we're kind of like the workers. We're coming in and like doing the hard work, right? Really paying attention, noticing things. And what's interesting about this is it creates certain kinds of problems. It has certain kinds of limitations. One of them is that, the curriculum is sort of one size fits all. That's what happens in the industry. You try to get a process that works and you try to replicate it on a mass scale. So that's kind of helpful in terms of scaling something, but it loses the ability to respond dynamically to what's happening. So I want to talk about a few ideas in terms of how it was kind of as I practice it or as I see it in the industrial meditation complex, and then maybe a little bit about how it might look as we're moving forward, which we don't really know. I mean, we're kind of in transition. Things are changing. Even these centers that I'm talking about and sort of being somewhat critical of, they're changing too. It's not to say, that they're not. Okay, so one thing I think might be happening, and I sort of sense and see, is that relationships and mentorship, like this kind of interpersonal, real relationship, is coming back. So, one of the benefits of the monastic environment or the monasteries are basically all these people hanging out, living together, this spiritual life, and they're really what they're doing is talking all the time. They're like, hey, what's going on for you? What's been happening in your meditation? What happened when you went to the city and, got rice? Like, did you like the rice? Did you not like the rice? Were you really upset when they only gave you papaya and no rice? It's like that kind of thing. They're talking and they're in relationship, they're in community. So there's some real benefit, there's something profound that I found happens when you're in relationship with someone and you're talking about these things together, right? I'm hanging out with Mikey the last 2 days. Something happens, when we go on a hike and talk. And I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. I don't know how to replicate it in terms of building, structures. I just know it's like the mystery of relationship, right? So that's one thing that the industrial meditation complex doesn't do so well with. Basically, for me to have a relationship with many of the teachers that I worked with, I had to just be a tenacious, crazy person, right? I was just going on retreat after retreat after retreat, And, they kept seeing me, I kept coming and talking to them, and eventually, they realized I wasn't going to go away. But that's not true for most people. Most people go, they talk to a teacher a little bit, they have a relationship that's sort of cursory, and then the next time they see them, probably they're not even remembered, right? Same with retreats and, what's called noble silence. So sometimes you go on retreat and it's all in silence. I don't know if anyone has experienced that, but it's really powerful, except that you don't get to know anybody, okay? You don't get to talk. You don't get to share what's going on. So what I see happening with the 21st century kind of model for this is that relationships, human contact, discussing things with each other, like that's actually starting to come back. And it's funny, I'm just noticing the irony of me being up here talking to you about this, but there it is, we'll talk later. So, in terms of technology, I think Skype has actually done a whole lot. Google Hangouts and Skype have done a whole lot to facilitate this. I've worked with all of my meditation students on Skype and have for like 5 years. It's really powerful, even if you haven't met someone in person, to be able to see them and talk. I can see that continuing to deepen and develop. I'm really excited. I've got an Oculus Rift 2, the DK2 at home, and I can't wait until we have some sort of telepresencing, virtual reality, because I can't wait to sit and talk to people with even more of an immersive experience, to really see all the subtleties and to see the body movement and to see, like, when I say something and the person goes, ugh, and vice versa. I think these technologies are only going to accelerate the process of wanting to spend more time in this sort of interpersonal engagement with each other. So that's one thing, relationships and mentoring making a comeback, okay? The other is really, core to this whole conversation here, consciousness hacking, and that is in the 20th century model, which is also mostly kind of kicked off by the boomer generation, right? The hippies, who I love. No, I'm good, thank you. I love the hippies. I've learned so much from that group of people. Most of my teachers are hippies. And the only challenge with the hippies is that most of them, at least the ones who went to Asia and came back to teach meditation, they don't like technology that much. They're not that into it. They don't think it's particularly helpful. Most of my teachers, again, who I really appreciate and I'm grateful for, also just think kind of technology is sort of a hindrance to practice. And I never felt that way. Like Mikey, I feel like there's a false dichotomy there that, maybe as millennials or, people that are growing up now, we have to break because it's not going away. Technology is not going away. So one of the things I think we're going to have to deal with in the 21st century is how to integrate that technology into the contemplative path. And in particular, what happens when we start developing technologies that superpower our meditation in certain ways? What happens when we build devices that actually help us reach certain understandings quicker than could be done in the traditional way? How do we then integrate that into our practice? Do we avoid it because it's not part of the, part of the way that you're supposed to practice? Or do we utilize it? Are we pragmatic about it? We're like, hey, I'll use whatever works. I'm suffering. This is difficult. I want to learn how to live a more, sane life and support other people. I will do anything I can in order to do that. I think if we're pragmatic about it, many of us will choose to use these things. So then the question, how do we integrate these technologies? The term I've been using lately is the technodelics, the things that have these profound consciousness-altering effects. I think that's going to be one of the main questions that we have to answer on the kind of contemplative side of the street. And we have to have an understanding of what the path looked like before these technologies were introduced to get a sense for how it's different. Not everyone has to do that, but some people have to kind of know that. So that's another thing that I think, is going to be changing. And as that changes, the third thing is that the role of the teacher or guide or mentor and the role of a community really changes. Because if you think of the teacher as basically serving three functions. One is to teach, a technique, to teach you how to train the mind. The other is to call you on your shit, right? A teacher, when they're doing their job well, they know you well enough that they can see where you're kind of bullshitting yourself and bullshitting them, and help you see that and help you grow. And that's a profound thing to be able to do, and it takes a lot of trust, which again is why relationship's so important. And sometimes the teacher's not right. Sometimes they're bullshitting you. And so, that takes a lot of trust to be able to say, actually, I think you're full of shit. Okay? You can't really do that in the top-down hierarchical model. It's not as easy. The structure doesn't support that. So again, this is where everything is kind of fitting together, connecting. And the third thing that the teacher does is serve as a kind of embodiment of whatever understanding it is that you're trying to realize yourself. I think of one of my teachers, a Zen teacher named Trudy Goodman. And, when I first met her on a retreat, she was giving a talk, and I couldn't follow anything she said. It was like she thought in circles and in pictures, and it wasn't linear and it wasn't analytical, and I had no idea what she said. And I thought, this person just I don't get it. After a few retreats with her, hanging out more with her, I started to sort of understand what she was saying. And I thought, maybe she knows something after all. And then when I went to live in Los Angeles for a year and really hang out with her, that's when I really started to get it. Like, she wasn't just talking about this stuff. She was embodying it. She was expressing it in everything that she did. And that was a profound thing. I remember being in an event with her organization inside LA. And at the event, the speaker who was invited there didn't have a mic. And so what happened was everyone looked around and said, "Where's the mic?" And so, here's the teacher of this organization. She heads it up. You expect someone, right, like a volunteer or someone to go get the mic. But immediately she springs up, grabs a mic, brings it up, hands it to the person. And to me, this is a small thing, but it just shows that there was no, in her mind, I could see, there was no idea of her being the teacher or the important person who doesn't get up and do stuff. She just immediately responded to the moment, was in service, didn't make a big deal about it. I'm making a big deal about it now because it was a big deal, because I probably would have just sat there with my hands on my ass, under my ass, and going, "Oh, where's the mic? Someone get it." But that's another thing that the teacher does is express or embody that understanding. So as we start integrating these technologies and start questioning the structures that we're using to help each other learn and train our minds, the role of the teacher and the role of the community, I think, starts to shift. It starts to shift away from just teaching the technique, okay? Because everyone here probably has seen, there's countless meditation apps now that teach technique, books, audiobooks. You can learn technique. We're overloaded actually with technical information. So the role isn't so much about learning the technique now that the technique is everywhere. So that shifts. The role actually, I think, becomes much more about seeing how we embody what we're doing, seeing how we bullshit each other and supporting each other in that, serving as mirrors for each other, reflecting that back to each other, helping each other wake up. And part of what I think might be happening as well is that the teacher's not the only one who's doing that now. Usually it's the teacher or senior students or something in the hierarchy, but now I think that function is being distributed through the network. So there's another thing that's happening because we're moving from this sort of top-down triangle to a network sort of system. We've got to figure out how to distribute those functions throughout the network. And that's really challenging, and I don't know that it's quite been done before, maybe except in small groups. So this is another challenge, another big question mark that I have of how do we do this. So if relationship comes back online, we're focusing on relationship, how do we then shift the conversation or the function of a teacher and community so that it's appropriate, to this time and place. And then along with that, I think there's a question of how do we integrate the insights that we have, through technology, through meditation, through, some people do psychedelics, through just life experiences. How do we take those things, those profound aha moments, those openings, those shifts of identity, and how do we actually apply them to our lives? I think the community and teachers and peers starts to really serve an important function of figuring that out, as opposed to just focusing on the technique or perpetuating certain kinds of forms or rituals. Maybe the forms and rituals need to change. Maybe they need to be changing all the time, like everything else. And the last thing I'm going to mention is, well, I'll just say that at Naropa, I was studying religion. I was studying Buddhism in particular, but I was studying multiple religious traditions and their contemplative cores, right? Like what made them contemplative? And I found in that training that there's a lot of value in the contemplative dimensions of religious traditions. There's certain code that's embedded there that's been tested and refined over thousands of years that's really powerful, and it really works. Like when you put it into practice, it works. At the same time, I was, grew up in the same, world that you did, noticing, the effects of religious ideology, of what happens when people hold on to the religious beliefs and they make everyone else wrong for not holding those beliefs. The huge pain and suffering that's caused by attachment to ideas and beliefs and ideologies. And I know that in our current culture, the basic feeling is we need to move away from those religions. We need to move away from that way of thinking. And I totally understand that. My question is, as we move toward a more secular society, and secular, one meaning of secular is actually non-sacred. That's actually what secular translates as, at least in one translation. One of the problems is, if we move away from religion toward the non-sacred, what happens to our experience of sacredness? Is everything not sacred? Many contemplative traditions actually end up saying everything is sacred. So how do we deal with the conflict of the problem that arises when we divorce our lives from a feeling and an experience of sacredness, of everything being really deeply important, of values actually, of the inner principles and values that drive us in service of, the secular, whatever the secular kind of religion is, okay? So for me, the other thing that we kind of have to do is find a way to integrate those two domains, the religious and the secular, to really find a way to take what is really meaningful about systems that are developed and designed to help work with big questions like, what is the meaning of this? Who am I? What is this all about? Who are we? I think there's a lot we have to learn from that the secular traditions don't really have, and really, in a way, they divorce themselves from those things. In a sense, they threw away the Buddha with the bathwater. They threw away a lot of things because they had so many problems associated with them. But now we're in a period where we've differentiated those things so deeply that we're actually starting to feel the alienation from some of these deeper things. So how do we bring these things back together in a way that actually works? I think that's another question. I don't have really a lot of answers to it, except that I'm unwilling, as I do this project, to say that it's Buddhist, and I'm unwilling to say that it's secular. I don't know what it is. It's borrowing from both. And I think in the same way, as we start to practice and we start to learn from all these different sources, in the same way, we're learning from both. We operate in the secular environment, and we learn from things that impact us deeply that could be called religious. And in the secular environment, there's a lot of religion that goes unnoticed as such. So, there's a lot of ideology that we have to, I think, be willing to question on that side of the street. So these are some of the questions that I'm thinking about, as I work on this project, mindtraining.io. Thank you. And Mikey. Mikey and I are going to have a conversation and then invite you all into that conversation as well.
Hello, hello. Hey, everyone. Hey, thank you, Vince. That was awesome. Peter, could you turn this mic up a little bit? It was very cool. And actually, you pretty much covered the whole. You covered a lot of territory there. So I think what would be fun is to kind of dive in a little bit on some of the points. And I tend towards the geeky side of things. So. I think I'll start kind of on the sort of the tech front and kind of dig in a little bit there. Let's do it. So thinking a little more practically.
No.
We're faced with some very, I wouldn't even call them real possibilities. I would say they're almost eventualities. They're in the works. These are technologies that really are able to facilitate a deep experience. And we're seeing the beginnings of that. We're seeing commercial devices, for example, like the Interaxon Muse, which is a wearable EEG device that actually measures your brain waves, and it has an app that can essentially help guide you into a deeper state of meditation. You're seeing even more sort of high-tech and research-oriented projects. We've got someone in the audience here, a couple people actually, that are working on a project to use really sophisticated EEG systems, sort of clinical-grade EEG system, and really complex mathematics to essentially pin down the exact areas of the brain associated with meditation and create sophisticated feedback loops in order to teach people how to basically replicate the brain state of really advanced meditators. You know, really, none of those might work, we don't know, but people are really moving in this direction, and it seems like there's no force that's going to stop them. And so what it seems like we're looking at is this eventual scenario where people will have access to technologies that can very quickly open doorways to deep experiences that in some case might have taken months or more in the context of a retreat setting to realize. And so with that as kind of the starting point, now you may disagree with that possibility, I don't know, but with that kind of as the starting point, I want to kind of discuss like what does that world look like? And what is the role for these traditional structures at that point, and what are the dangers if you have technologies with that kind of capability?
The dangers, yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about this, and one of the things that seems kind of like the only useful thing we have to point to in terms of how we might navigate some of these things, and I think they are probably going to happen. You know, I agree with that. I can see the general trend, and the trend line is moving toward trippier and trippier technologies. But it seems like the one thing we have to look at is, you know, how have people handled psychedelics and meditation? Because there's a handful of folks who had been asking those same questions with respect to these very profound mind-altering chemical compounds that, you know, in my mind, again, are kind of could offer something similar, like these very profound shifts in consciousness or types of insights about the nature of identity. And it seems like from the folks that I really respect and have heard talk about this, you know, and have experience on both sides, it's really tricky. It's really like difficult to figure out how to do that because it's so easy to become dependent on, you know, the thing that kind of like magically transforms everything. And in doing that, it's like sometimes difficult to then do the hard work of integration of like, like really being able to ground that experience and see how it's operating, moment by moment, day by day, even when it's not, being ingested, or maybe in this case where the technology, is not being used. And so I think that's one thing I've been thinking about, and I don't know. The technologies might be designed or developed in a way that could mitigate that. You can't really do that as much with psychedelics.
Right. So often the example that's often given with psychedelics, or the metaphor, is that psychedelics are like a rocket ship, right? That shoot you off to this other planet. You get out of your rocket ship, you look around, you're like, holy shit, where am I? And it's amazing and it's beautiful and whatever it is. And then you come back down to Earth, and you have this incredible memory of this past experience that may have deeply influenced and affected you, but you don't actually have the means to get back there without the rocket ship. And so that's kind of the metaphor I've heard with psychedelics. And so I guess the open question is technology the same beast? Is it the same kind of thing? Because it seems like with psychedelics, it's this all or nothing thing, right? You know, it's this chemical and it's very fixed. Whereas with technology, there seems to be this, you can imagine a continuum where you say, okay, let's take traditional practice and let's say we accept that that's a good thing, you know, sitting on your cushion and meditating, okay. Well, then you can imagine a very small technology augmentation to that. Right? For example, adding, you know, a basic thing like we already have is like maybe a guided meditation on your phone, or even a meditation timer on your phone, something to help remind you or help shape your habit, right? A simple technology thing that helps make it more accessible. And then you can imagine maybe a better edition of technology where, you know, it's something that plays a certain sound that influences your brainwaves in a very subtle way that just helps calm your mind and help you deepen into your practice. And you can kind of imagine these incremental steps, and then all of a sudden you've moved down this continuum, and then you've got kind of the, you know, this sort of technology of the future for meditation. And I guess my question is, it seems like on that path we can really optimize for what we want, right? And I think you will necessarily, no question, have the same kind of situation. You'll have technologies that are the equivalent of a rocket ship, right? I have no doubt in my mind there will be technologies that are more profound, more powerful, more potent than any chemical that exists today, just because technologies, I think, are what we are evolving much more rapidly. But I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think that there's some fundamental problem or some fundamental issue with a technology that is also optimized to really make traditional practice obsolete, where it really does it better and actually serves all the same purposes, but it's more efficient, it's more accessible, and it can be distributed on a much wider scale?
I was having this same conversation and asking this question a few years ago with this old teacher named Ken MacLeod. He was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher who did 8 years in retreat and studied all the stuff and ended up actually leaving the Tibetan thing. He said he's been divorced 3 times. The first 2 were wives, and the third one was a divorce from Tibetan Buddhism. And he said that was the hardest one, was the Tibetan Buddhist divorce. So he really went deep inside this thing and did all the traditional things and learned the practices and did the whole thing. And then he came out of it and divorced himself from it. And so he's open to this conversation. And I asked him that same question. He said, well, Vince, you're assuming that there's something that you're assuming that all of this is sort of based on, again, the techniques and the experiences. It's like, what if there's something that's changing over time that simply takes time to happen? And I sort of argued and fought with him about that. And then now I find myself kind of leaning a little more toward that perspective. And I think the reason is, and I'll use the meditation timer as an example. I use a meditation timer and have for years. And I found it really helpful. It's like, okay, I set the timer, I'm gonna commit, I'm gonna be sitting there the whole time. It helps my discipline, I know when I'm done, it's useful. And then at a certain point I found that my formal practice started getting stale. And actually what I ended up having to do was stop timing it and just sit and just let whatever was going to happen and unfold, and get up when I was ready to get up, and stop sort of thinking about my meditation as this thing that happened in this slot of time, and kind of break down that distinction. And so what I found was even that minor augmentation of technology set up this new problem in my practice. It revealed something, it supported something, and it also concealed something. It made something not obvious. And so I think no matter what we do, no matter what technology or technique or approach that we use, like, it's always going to have a limitation. It's always going to have something that's hidden from us, from view. And that's what I would call delusion, in the traditional sense. It's like something we don't see, and we don't see that we don't see it. Other people might see it, but we don't see it. And so my question is, how do you account for that? How do you account for the limitation of every possible approach and view and perspective? Because there's something in us that just constantly wants to have the final answer and the final thing, and to know that we are done and that we've got it worked out. It's better than the traditional, Like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. But what I keep finding, what I keep going back to as like a core, kind of truthiness of, within the Buddhist framework, is that delusion and our ability to delude ourselves is actually pretty endless. We are constantly thinking that we have it worked out when we don't. And then later we figure out we didn't, and we go, oh my God, can't believe I didn't, can't believe I thought I had that figured out. So I would just say, like, what if there's no end to that delusion, and really the delusion of your question might have something to do with thinking that we are going to, to be able to optimize for something that's like, ultimately going to get rid of our confusions. I'm not saying you're saying that, but
the ultimate technology, the one that allows you to realize right now in this moment that there's no end to delusions.
Maybe.
So I agree. I think that what you're pointing to is inescapable, but it seems like the very notion of skillfulness is the answer to that. And it's an inescapable thing, right? There's no perfect skillfulness. But, for example, if you have a meditation teacher, if they sit in front of people and they kind of mumble their words and they don't really make sense and they're not really doing a good job of talking, that's just if you think broadly from a technology perspective, where the technology is the instruction, the technology is the words and the way they're expressed, that's unskillful means. Whereas a good teacher has a way of really deeply expressing themselves, really even energetically expressing that experience in which they're trying to point to. And that's why some teachers are really effective and some are not. It doesn't mean that particular teacher can sort of circumvent the whole notion of delusion, but it does seem like there is some notion of progress, some notion of refinement, some notion of optimization that happens.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I think if you really think delusions are endless, the one of the consequences of that, at least initially, is being really depressed. And actually, for me, it has been. Because then there's some sense in which you start to realize, like, I'm never gonna get out of this alive. I'm never gonna get out of this alive, and I'm never gonna have the final answer. And yet somehow that has to be okay, and somehow I still need to optimize for something. I still need to move towards something. I still need to develop something. I still want to work on opening my heart, or work on developing particular skills, or making time for relationships. Like, somehow we still have to make those decisions, but we do it without thinking or believing that it's going to resolve that deep existential anxiety at the core of our being. And to me, what the spiritual paths are pointing to is a way of relating to that, to recognizing that is not going away. That is part of what it means to be a creature who is separated from the rest of the world. who lives in a constant state of uncertainty, where we don't know what's coming next. I mean, we don't know what's coming next, but we don't even know what's going to come next, like right now, like in the next second. Like that's how groundless, the situation is. So, coming to terms with that, I've had so many different kinds of experiences, and none of them have really told me like how to deal with that. Like some of them have like been a temporary reprieve from that. But then ultimately it always comes back. Like I wake up and I'm like, shit, I'm back here. And now I got to go to work.
All right, I'll tell you the secret after the meetup.
Thanks.
So maybe we'll open it up now. Forrest, did you want to? Nora, can you run the microphone around? Oh wait, Forrest, you got to come in front of the speakers, or things are gonna get crazy.
Thanks so much. That was really fun. Dan Brown I just learned this recently. He was saying that actually the monastic traditions were actually the beginning of the industrialization, and were the beginning of attempts to scale this out. And so I'm wondering if you know much about what was going on before that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who you mentioned just now, who you're referencing, but I sort of think of it as being connected to the agrarian revolution, actually more than industrial, because monasteries arose at a time when we could actually start to grow food and be able to support groups that were like living in a place together. And before the agricultural revolution, there weren't like monasteries in that sense. So, looking at the agrarian leading to the industrial, it's definitely a movement, that was kind of related, and it's all connected in some weird way that I don't understand. But it's really fascinating how those socioeconomic conditions end up creating conditions for how people ask these questions about who they are and start investigating their consciousness. And another way of framing what I was trying to say in the talk is, what's happening to the spiritual, contemplative, meditative sides of our human, lineage as we move from agrarian to industrial to now this informational, digital, socioeconomic moment in history. Because we're actually transitioning into a whole new basic structure, and that's going to change not only how we do this, but maybe what we experience and how we make sense of what we're experiencing, and that's pretty cool.
I was reading something today that was talking about how important memory is. It was mostly talking about cultural memory for our sense of humanity, identity. And so I'm wondering whether you think, and now I think maybe here in this space, think about the future a lot. So I'm wondering, but as I was reading the article, I was feeling how, lost in some ways. I feel not personally having a strong sense of cultural memory to come out of, to be. So I'm wondering for you, do you feel like there are important pieces of either the histories of spiritual traditions that you've participated in, or perhaps the history of digital technological development or technological development in general that you feel like are relevant here that we should keep in mind?
This is something I've been coming around to, and it relates to the whole piece about integrating religious and secular. So one thing I always bristled against when I was going, and practicing with my hippie teachers, is that they love to always do these rituals, right? It's like every, bowing and, doing all these things, these closing ceremonies where everyone's holding hands, and I'm like, oh God, not again, I have to hold hands. And it took me a long time to realize, maybe I started to get it more when I started teaching and working with people, that those rituals, even though I kind of didn't like the hippie flavor of them, they were really important building blocks for experience. And I think that might be one of the reasons it's so disorienting and confusing for so many people, is that we've lost so many cultural rituals, like things that we could rely on, that we could come back to, that gave us a sense of meaning, of some way to anchor meaning. And I've started thinking, we've got to kind of start creating more rituals together. Even if we decide that we're creating them, that we're making them up, that they don't have to necessarily come from the past, although they could. But that's really important, like, for instance, how, when we start something, is there a way that we start it? Is there something we can kind of rely on as a starting point? For me in meditation, it's, let me check in and see what my intention is to do this, and then, do we have something to end stuff? Can we have a ritual around that? In my practice, it's like, may this practice be for the benefit of others, not just for myself. A way of, and that's a traditional thing, but for me it really helps lock in the flavor, sort of like help distribute the goodness of what I'm doing and not make it just about me. So I've been wondering how to create ritual in the 21st century, and I'm not really clear on that, but I think it might be part of what you're asking. It's not the whole by any means. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I think even actually the idea of ritual connects nicely to the ideas of community that you were talking about, because in a sense, a shared ritual is really a way of creating almost like a synchronization, right? We're doing the same thing at the same time, or for the same purpose, or in the same context, and it's a way of actually grounding in and connecting with other people in a deep way. And it almost seems like that's what we're yearning for in some sense through all of these sort of efforts towards social interaction, is to find some common grounded way of interacting and connecting with people through some kind of formal process or something like that. And it's funny because we have this love-hate relationship with it, because we don't want to be told to do it, yet it seems to still happen spontaneously. These things still seem to emerge. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
And if we're not creating good rituals, then we're usually just adopting unconscious ones,
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming out, and both of you guys just killing it. It's wonderful.
We're like startups. We're killing it.
Yeah, I mean, terrible metaphorical choice. You guys are expounding the digital dharma, and it's beautiful. Vince, towards the end of your talk, you mentioned that specifically the secular world has a lot of religion or implicit ideology embedded in it.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you both could expand on kind of the problematic features of that, and where you see opportunities for this movement to address that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the some of the ideologies I've been seeing in the secular world that I've been kind of questioning lately are, one, scientism, which is not science, but the belief in science that's really opposed to the scientific process. And that is, also kind of core to that is believing everything is material and that's it. Everything are these objects and we can measure them. And that I keep finding is it's a philosophical leap. It's a theological leap to think that that's true and to believe it no matter what. And there are certain assumptions that come with certain ways of approaching science that we take to be true. That consciousness is a function of the brain. That's one, common belief, even though there's no evidence for that. And there could be no evidence for that. It's literally a faith. And the other is kind of to me, is the capitalist, kind of ideology and system of like how we organize our resources, how we function together. Like there's some deep beliefs in that. I mean, that are really difficult to penetrate and to even see. It's like built into our language. It's built into how we behave. It affects our feeling of being valuable or not. And I think the spiritual traditions are really aimed at cutting through certain kinds of ideas about who and what we are. And when we apply that, that courageous approach to our cultural beliefs, then we can actually question things. And maybe we can imagine something that might be better and that might actually align with something that's more beautiful, more, loving, more caring, more compassionate, leads to better results. So those are some of the things I've been thinking about lately.
And I think ideologies just on their own are neutral, right? There's no inherent valence to an ideology, but just in principle. But some ideologies can be very, very harmful, can in a deep way, and I guess it depends on what you consider to be harmful. But I think certain ideologies can produce a lot of suffering, a lot of psychological suffering, a lot of a sense of discontent in the world. And I'll make a really broad, sweeping statement about one particular ideology. I think that there's one idea in the secular world that is probably one of the most, if not the most, universally believed ideologies, particularly in the United States, which is arguably one of the most harmful ideologies that we hold in terms of our own well-being. And that ideology is that there is some set of circumstances that will make you happy. Meaning there is some way that you can ultimately arrange your experience or your world that will be your final completion, your ticket to finally realizing perfection or well-being or happiness or peace or whatever you want to call it. And what that creates is an existence in a hamster wheel, where we are constantly chasing something that can never be achievable through external means. There is no way that you can configure reality in order to finally perfectly match your expectations and make you content, maybe for a moment, and then it will change. And so arguably that's the least effective way you could possibly have to being happy. And so that's an example of an ideology in the secular world that is extremely destructive, and reversing that even could be really helpful. I think we have a question back here.
Yeah. Mike, I'm really struggling with the idea of meditating with an EEG band. That seems to be aligning my brain in this perfect configuration where everything would be one forever. On two different levels. On intellectual level, I'm optimizing for equanimity, which is logically doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah. Like optimizing to be in this equanimous state of mind where I know what's good and what's bad. And also on spiritual level, there are some sutras that practice and realization appear as two different things, only to a deluded mind. So in Buddhism, there's this.
Wait, can you say that the last thing again?
The practice and realization appears to things only to a deluded mind. Of that, they said before that if you practice without a timer, it's all very fresh, and you cannot say what's practice and what's realization between the two. Just do you think that having EEG bands is basically the same, with how you said it, the squirrel wheel, the hamster wheel thing, but just happening in the meditation space?
Great, thank you for your question. That's totally the kind of questions we need. So first, to your comment that there's only a difference between practice and realization to a deluded mind, I would counter that by saying there's only a difference between practice and life to a deluded mind. And so practice is not a thing, it's not a time, it's not a place, and realization is not a thing, a time, or a place. And so in that sense, technology does not, in any way that's different from a meditation practice itself, add weight to that particular thing one way or another, I don't think. But your question of, okay, this idea of putting on this EEG band and somehow optimizing for some equanimous state that seems like itself kind of paradoxical and like what are we even optimizing for here? I think that's actually a very specific perspective on one approach to technology, which you just named, which is a particular type of technology, reading a particular thing, and optimizing for something which is kind of an assumption on your part, which is what it might be optimizing for. That's like we could talk about that one particular instantiation, but actually I think the perspective here is that the possibilities are endless, right? And we can optimize for whatever we want. And I would argue that that earlier today, when Vince was leading us in a guided meditation, and he was speaking, and those words were producing sound waves, actual, mechanical waves in the air, and those were entering into your ear, and those were producing a particular neural pattern. Vince was using a form of brain stimulation in order to, in an optimal way, influence and change the way that your brain is responding. And actually, he was engaged in a feedback loop. By being here in this room and observing the room, feeling the energy of the room, he was kind of deciding which words to say, what pace to say them, what tone to use. And so Vince was basically a neurofeedback machine that we turned on. He did his thing for 10 minutes, and then we turned him off. For the meditation part. And so I would just argue that I don't actually think that there's a black and white distinction between what Vince did with the spoken meditation and what we can imagine technology doing. And so in the case of the EEG band, there's any problem that you can point to, that you can say, wait a minute, this is kind of optimizing for something that doesn't feel right or doesn't feel good. There can be a whole team of scientists and researchers and meditation instructors that can team up together and say, that's a good problem, let's solve it. Right? And then come to the next problem, and come to the next problem, and come to the next problem. There's no final time in which there will be a perfect technology for meditation, ever in the history of humankind. We'll never have the perfect techno-meditation tool. It will always have its problems, it will always have its limitations, just like there will never be a time where there's a perfect meditation instruction, or a perfect scripture, or a perfect pointer, or a perfect teacher. There will always be conflict, there will always be difficulties there. So it's not a proposition that somehow these are the perfect end-all solutions to every problem. It's just saying, hey, if we're gonna have technology in this world, why the hell wouldn't we want it to help us reduce human suffering? It seems to have that potential, right? It's already doing it in a sense, so let's just try. Let's put an effort in that direction, and if problems are created, let's try to solve them as they come up. And it seems like a worthwhile human effort to kind of use science and technology towards the same purpose that most Buddhists vow to, which is the, sort of a bodhisattva kind of vow, which is the eradication of human suffering at all costs. And if it truly is at all costs, meaning if there is a true, deep, fundamental vow to eradicate human suffering, to all of a sudden point to something that we call science, or to point to something that we call technology and say, oh yeah, but except for that, we can eradicate human suffering but not use those things. That seems like an unnecessarily limiting perspective. Next.
Thanks so much for sharing your comments and your thoughts. Yeah, something came up for me. I think, with spiritual path and kind of going down that spiritual path, a big part of that is turning towards discomfort, turning towards pain, also turning towards pleasure, but trying to understand that dichotomy of pain and pleasure. With meditation devices, you could argue simply that a meditation timer is actually a way to turn away from discomfort in a way. with a lot of these meditation devices that are coming out now, how, I'm just wondering what you guys feel about that, being practitioners, where turning towards discomfort is actually a fairly enlightening thing. How do we measure that? How do we are we concealing something there? And that's my question.
Great question.
Yeah, good question. It reminded me of a phrase that was uttered by an Indian gentleman in, I think, the 700s. His name was Tilopa. He said, "The problem is not pleasure, the problem is attachment." And that's a really interesting kind of perspective, because he was basically saying, the problem isn't discomfort or comfort. Like, the problem is somehow our relationship to that, and the way that we're conditioned to relate to pleasure and pain, to gain and loss, to fame and the lack of fame or losing fame. Like, all of those things that are out of our control. Like, we can't perfectly, again, control for those conditions unless we can control for all conditions. And as far as we can tell, we can't control for all conditions.
Working on that app.
The God app. So, then that leaves a very deep question, which I think you're pointing to, which is that, part of the problem is when we notice that we're trying to control things we can't control, and that as a result, we're actually feeling the rope burn of reality. We're holding on when things are changing and we don't want them to, or we're trying to ignore something that's right in front of our face, and it just gets louder and louder until it finally knocks us over and we have to deal with it. And so the practices that I've learned are very much what you described. They're about turning toward the discomfort, feeling the pain, and feeling the resistance to that pain. There's a great formula that this geeky Buddhist teacher named Shinzen Young uses to describe the predicament that we're in. And he says, S equals P times R. So suffering equals pain times resistance. And in that formula, which is a classic Buddhist formula, actually, the resistance is optional and the pain is built in. The pain is unavoidable. It's like part of our, just however we're programmed, our genetics, our situation, our having a body, having a mind, having a history. And so it's weird that, in order to reduce the resistance, we actually have to go into and understand the nature of pain and the nature of resistance, and be able to somehow accept and allow things that we really, on some level, just do not want. Like, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to not know what's coming next. We don't want to feel, so many things that we feel. And that's true of people that have never meditated before, as much as it is people who have meditated their whole lives. The difference is in how we've trained ourselves to be able to allow the flow of experience. And if technology again can help with that, I think it should. And yet, even if we can allow the flow of experience, it doesn't mean there's still not going to be problems in the world. Yeah. So, that gets into a question about the self and world and how separate those things are. But maybe that's another meetup.
Yeah, great question. And so in terms of creating technology that allows the flow of experience, there are some hurdles we have to overcome. One big one is that as we see this burgeoning movement of health and wellness related technology, it's all health and wellness related, meaning the only thing that anyone ever wants to talk about, and the only thing that right now sells, and the only thing that's ever marketed, is feeling better, is some sort of cure or alleviation of that which you are avoiding, of that which you find unpleasant, of that which you want to escape. And so the way that even these meditation tools or apps or whatever are marketed is as a solution, as a way out, as an escape from that. And so that's not just a PR marketing problem. That's also, I believe, a problem, a cultural problem. that has its roots pretty deep, but manifests even in terms of the engineers that are building the technology, and the CEOs of the companies that are selling the technology, and the PR people and the marketing people that are hired by them. And in order to create technology that can actually guide people or point people towards embracing the full span of human experience, which really means technology that supports you skillfully in a process of feeling that which you don't want to feel, that which you would otherwise escape. You really have to create some deeper fundamental changes in how you are selling that technology and how that technology is working. And that those changes have to happen, not just, they have to happen both from the inside, meaning the people creating the technologies have to understand that experientially. They have to themselves realize that endlessly chasing the escape to your own suffering only creates more suffering. So they have to know that from the creator side, and on the other side, on the receiving side, from the market perspective, there has to be some effort that's made to basically create demand for people to feel crappy things, which is, it's a really like paradoxical problem. And so my hope is that that is something that collectively begins to change, and that collectively begins to become more accepted and more trendy and more cool, you know, where it really becomes like, you know, this idea of like the tough guy, right? You know, the sort of cool, obviously that's not me because I'm like, what's a tough guy like? So this is my tough guy move. So like there's like, you know, this idea of like the tough guy is someone that can right now really act out their anger, right? Someone that can really act from that place and to really, which is really an escape from it. It's an inability to really feel it and touch it. Whereas there could be this new idea of a tough guy, which is someone that can actually fully, deeply experience and have the bravery and the wherewithal and the awareness to fully, deeply experience what's inside of them that most people are never willing to face. Not what's outside of them, but what's inside of them. And that becomes like the new notion of bravery. And we'll have new movies, right, around these superheroes that like face their own inner demons, you know, these kinds of things. Which I think Pixar just coming out with one of those pretty soon. I'm serious. So I don't know where the microphone is.
I have it.
Okay.
Vincent, thanks for speaking. I listen to you on Buddhist Geeks. I also support you on Patreon. So I really like the theme song. It's pretty, I bob my head when I hear it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So two things, and I don't know if these are questions or comments, but please give me your thoughts. One, somebody talked about context. A little bit about where I'm coming from. I've been a long-term student of Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Ajahn Jeff, who's the abbot of Metta Forest Monastery. And the monastic Sangha has maintained the teachings for over 2,500 years. And, you know, as far as ritual and community and contact with monks and nuns, I mean, that's really lost when we move to a model of exclusively lay teachers who are often trained in psychology or psychiatry. And I think it's a significant loss. We're losing a lot of ritual and context and teachings on precepts. And then the other thing I wonder about the technology itself that's being developed. We know that the kamikaze pilots, from the Japanese kamikaze pilots, they would get into states, meditative absorption, before they would crash into planes, and samurai soldiers studied meditation as well. I'm not trying to pick on the Japanese people. They're just two examples, I think, of the meditation being used for purposes of killing. And I wonder, I can easily see the Department of Defense latching on to this kind of technology and using it to train soldiers so they're better at aiming drones and sniping and whatever else, and snipers.
There's a mindfulness for snipers program, actually.
Okay, so we're already there. So what are your thoughts on that? What about the context, losing that context of the connection with the traditional monastic sangha, and also how this technology can be used. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you for your questions and thoughts there. Yeah, I thought a lot about, I don't know how interesting this is going to be to you all, but I thought a lot about the monastic question. I've studied with a couple like old school monks in the Thai forest tradition, but have largely been drawn to other forms, like the psychotherapists and teachers you mentioned. But when I was reading a book called What Technology Wants by a fellow named Kevin Kelly, he pointed out something really interesting, which is that throughout history, all of these different technologies that we think are lost are actually, most of them are actually being, they're being taken care of and they're being nurtured by very small groups. And he uses the example of the 1790 Kentucky flint rifle. So that's my favorite example. There's like a small group of aficionados who continue to maintain the knowledge of how to operate and how to build and how to fire the Kentucky flint rifle, the 1790 version. And they get together, they hang out, and they take 10 minutes to load the thing, and then they shoot, And I kind of see what's happening right now with the Asian monastic systems. Some of the, like the Theravada ones in particular, are the most like rigorous in a way, and thus the most difficult to maintain. I sort of see something similar to that happening, where they're much smaller, but they're maintained by enthusiasts, people who really see that there's some deep value there, who are drawn to that lifestyle, who really were born in the wrong century, and were able to find this stuff. And I think those people are so important, in part because we need to often go back and check on our repository of code, and see like what we can learn from those things and how we can bring those things forward. To me, it's not realistic to perpetuate those systems. They just don't work in our current context. And that's clear based on the adoption of them. But it's also important that we don't lose them and that some people continue them, so that we have access to that knowledge. Who knows when we're going to need the Kentucky flint rifle, something about the Kentucky flint rifle. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about the monastic system. And it sounds like we're not losing everything if you're studying with those folks and interested in it. There's still people interested, so that's great. And I think the other question you asked like really ties into that one, the first one, because, and I talked about this at the Buddhist Geeks conference last year, about this process that's happening with Buddhism, where mindfulness, which is a factor in Buddhism, it was considered like a core part, but it was only one part of a larger system, this bundled system. Mindfulness has been extracted or unbundled from Buddhism and is now being rebundled with all kinds of things, including sniping, and including mindful, relationship work and mindful, I don't even want to get into the number of different mindfulness approaches you've seen. But I think the deeper question is what happens when we apply these tools that were almost always held in an ethical context. They were part of a larger system that included the question of how do we live and how do we live skillfully. What happens when we pull that out, extract it, and apply it in a new system that maybe has an ethics that we question, or is questionable, or doesn't really care about ethics, and thus acts usually unethically. And I think those are really important questions for those of us who care. At the same time, I think there's something really valuable about our culture, which is that we allow experimentation, and allow people to take things and apply them. And I think as long as we're checking to see what the effects are in the broader context, like I don't think we should be too worried about people using mindfulness in ways we don't like. Some of that is our own trip and our own attachment to how we think it should be done. And some of it maybe is, problematic, and maybe we do need to, take a stand against those things. That's what I have.
I'll just say, I believe that anything that can happen will happen, and you will have the worst imaginable, most harmful uses of this technology that we can fathom. And you'll also, on the flip side, have the most incredible, helpful, beneficial uses of the technology that you can imagine. And all of it will exist. And so it's up to, it's the cheesy way of saying it, but it's up to each of us as individuals to embody and live from that place that leads to the creation, the use of, and the manifestation of the technologies on the good side with the Force. That's my sense of it. Just as a note on timing, I think we have time I want to try and end at 8:30, so just 3 or 4 more minutes, and then we're going to move into the lightning round. Can I get a quick check? How many people want to participate in the lightning round? The lightning round is 2 minutes where you get to basically address the community and talk about whatever you want. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, great. So yeah, let's take like 2 more questions. Okay, perfect. 2 more. Okay, great.
Okay, so sorry, I'm pretty soft-spoken, so hopefully you guys can hear me. My question is a little bit about accessibility. I know, obviously, many of us know there are a lot of really great benefits to meditation and the like, including, I know that there has been anecdotal as well as documented instances of people who are suffering from a lot of like mental illness and having a positive effect on them, depression, anxiety disorders, a ton of different stuff like that. And I know, just thinking about, like you guys talking about the traditional sort of retreat type way of learning about meditation, I mean, quite frankly, as we know, happens to a lot of times disclude people who may not be able to, quote, afford to go, that sort of thing. And I know that, kind of going back to mental illness, that is something that is, there's a lot of places in the world, sometimes even here, where that is barely even addressed in any sort of way. And I'm just wondering if there is a sort of movement or maybe some technology right now in the modern, as you guys say, like the 21st century way of meditating that is sort of reaching to try to make that accessible to people who might not have been able to have access to it in the traditional sense before.
Yeah, I mean, I think accessibility is one of those, really important questions when it comes to this stuff, because, if it is helpful and it is useful, I personally want everyone who can have access to have access. And then there's also the realities of how to do that within our current context and structures. And then to me, that's, it's the gap between those where all the work happens. And so I think the ideal of accessibility, is something to move toward. It's important, especially if we're creating things, to not confuse the ideal with where we should be right now. And so I have a sense there probably are technologies, and I think Mikey could speak to those more clearly, but there also are movements, within the meditative traditions to make things more accessible. I think the digital, I was just thinking about virtual reality retreats, it's going to be a lot less overhead to put those on. So, you still have to have access to a headset or whatever, but those things are dropping pretty dramatically in price. So I imagine some of this might even be addressed by some of the exponentials that are happening with technology and the drop in price. Some of it might just happen naturally, but then other things, I imagine are going to take really caring, concerned people to work on. So, yeah.
I used to work on robot-related things, and in the robot world, you have a lot of engineers that are kind of like nerdy in their caves. This is me included, like working on the robot arm that can perfectly pick up the object, or the robot that can navigate through the space perfectly. And so you've got these types of people creating, for example, a robot that will move through a hospital, right, and can be used to deliver food and medicine. And be used as a tool to communicate with patients. And if you have people designing that technology that doesn't actually think about the interaction, the way in which that technology is perceived, what you'll end up with is a robot that rolls into a room that can perfectly navigate the hallways, that can open the door perfectly, that can deliver the right medicine at the right time, and the moment they get into the room, that person screams and yells for the thing to get out of there because they're freaked out by it. And so as well as the robot could navigate through the space, it was essentially non-functional, because it was not compatible, it was not accessible by the person that it was approaching. And in the same way, I believe that the degree to which a pointer, a tool, whether that be traditional meditation or technology, is accessible, is the degree to which it's functional. Because a tool or a technology that only works for a small handful of people, from the broad scope, from the broad perspective, does not have a broad effect, broad implications, a broad positive influence. And so personally, one of the reasons I'm so excited about technology is the possibility of creating tools that are totally, perfectly in line with existing social norms, with existing social expectations, social patterns, and momentum. And so you can really strive towards these mass adoptions and things that are accessible on a really, really, really wide scale. So I agree it's important, and I really think that that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we had one more question.
Okay, thank you. This has been a very fascinating conversation. And my question is going back to a lot of the questions that have been asked before about what happens when we take meditation, mindfulness, out of the context in which it's been traditionally taught in, between the social norm and the ethics. So there are two things that I thought of, and I would love to get your ideas, because I definitely support the aim of the technology to provide beneficial relief for many, many people. But it seems that there are two challenges. One is the possible commodification of the spiritual path. And, you know, as a capitalist society, as a capitalist world, it's inevitable, basically. But in the traditions where it has been taught, it's usually been donation-based. You support the monks, you give them food, they give teaching for free, you know, you have retreats in forests, it's been free. And there might be something lost by the commodification of technology for this purpose. And second is the idea of ego. So when you have the idea of an app to train your mind to be a better person, to be more happy. A lot of technology works, and you know, neurofeedback works with improvements and gamification. You have to use that to get to a more advanced stage. And when you reach these like very blissful meditative states, you can be supporting the idea that you are advanced, that, you know, your ego and delusion can also grow. And so those are the two dangers that I see, and I was wondering, you know, what you think of that.
Yeah, great questions, thank you. So I'm noticing almost all the questions are coming in twos, but interesting. So, you know, to your first point, this is something I've only just been recently learning about, and I'm going to get a little Buddhist geeky on you, if that's okay. Because it's true that in the Asian countries that we know of where Buddhism's practiced in that monastic way, they do have a different economic model and a different system. And it is often donation-based, which essentially means people get food once a day. It's not true. That's like more in the meditative ones. You know, other monasteries are doing quite well, okay? But actually the history of Buddhism is a history of Buddhism usually being the biggest business in town. It's actually, I'm finding now as I get into the history of this that we've kind of romanticized Buddhism as not being involved in business or not being involved with money or being involved in this very altruistic way, but it's actually like, it's not true at all. Buddhism has a history of all kinds of corruption and being in bed with, crazy dictators. And, the only reason we probably know about Buddhism is because the Buddha was a really good statesman, and he, impressed one of the kings of the time and got a bunch of land. So, I think one of the ways of working with these questions is to really try to understand the history well, if this is an area that we're working in. And because what happens when you look at the history is usually ideals get destroyed. Usually we see these are not just issues that are happening now, they're issues that have been happening for a long time. And so they're issues that actually have a lot of momentum. Greed, hatred, and delusion, as the Buddhists say, are the causes of suffering, and they didn't just arise in with the capitalist system. No, I mean, they've been around. So that said, I do think there's one of the questions that arises is how can we align our systems and structures with the understandings that come out of our contemplative lives. If they're not in alignment, what does that say? How do we work with that? Some systems actually are designed to generate feelings of greed or feelings of lack in us, And so if that's not how we want to program ourselves, how do we change those systems so that they can actually program something different? Those are, to me, really important questions. The other thing you mentioned of, if I understood you right, of having technologies where we could experience these profound states of consciousness, and then basically co-opt them and become someone special because we've experienced them. That's an old problem too. In the Zen tradition, they actually called that the stink of enlightenment. Because someone, goes in and they have this experience and then they come out. I'm sure you've met this person. I've been this person. Mikey still is that person.
Sure though, it's I'm finished.
And, and then they're just they're so into themselves because they've had that experience, and that it stinks, it smells, it's like, ugh. And there's really a process where someone has to go through a period of disillusionment, of seeing that experience doesn't actually make them perfect, like we're talking about. And it's actually not even really that special. It just becomes super normal and ordinary, and you just go about your day. And
Jealous.
and organize consciousness hacking meetups. So I think it is a concern too of mine, because that's the piece where I think community and people and relationships are going to be so important, so we don't just have people strapping devices on, having these mind-blowing experiences, and then running around being like, I am the most amazing thing, yeah, but you're still a dick.
And that will happen, guaranteed. And in terms of the monetization question, I think it's very difficult and even problematic to try to judge based on external appearance and circumstance who someone is and where they're coming from and what their experience is. And I think a lot of problems come from that. And looking at the same question of financial gain, there is no doubt, especially considering our current economic system and for many, many, many years to come, that there will be a stratification, meaning there will be people that have a huge amount of wealth compared to other people. And so then you could ask another question, would you rather have those people be jerks, or would you rather have those people be profoundly insightful, balanced human beings? And so if you were to limit financial gain in such a way that it was not okay for people that had a deep, profound experience to attain that, then you'd end up with a world full of rich jerks. So I'd rather live in a world where actually it's encouraged that the people with power are the people with insight, are the people with wisdom. And so I hope that those come into a deeper union. And with that, cool. So let's just, anyone who wants to do a lightning round, so thank you, Vince. Thank you very much. Thank you. And anyone who wants to do a lightning round, just come line up right over here, and then let's all just stand up for a moment. And we're not moving around, we're not getting all crazy, but we're just reaching for the sky, stretching, and touching our toes. Okay. Cool. You guys are troopers. So the way that it goes with the lightning round, you guys can sit or stand or whatever you want, but we're gonna start it again. So the way it goes with the lightning round is I'm gonna time you. It's 2 minutes max, and when you come in, just say your name, and then whatever little spiel you want. And if it starts getting to your 2 minutes, I'm gonna give you a little nudge. Okay? So Winslow.
Thanks, Mikey. So I wanted to say a few words about a startup that I'm working for. It's called Palo Alto Neuroscience. So my name is Winslow Strong, and I'm working with a guy, Forrest Bennett, back there in the purple shirt. And we're trying to build one of these kind of Uber techs, like the dream tech, to take people to advanced endpoints of the spiritual practices of the world. Our methodology to do so is EEG neurofeedback. So a device you wear in your head reads your brain waves, feeds them back to you, and hopefully coaches you towards the brain activity of people who have had practices that have taken them to advanced places. So there are devices out there like the Muse that are doing something like this, but we're taking it to the next level where we're trying to figure out where in the three-dimensional brain the brainwaves are originating from. So we believe this will be far more powerful than anything that's been done before in this type of tech. Right now, Forrest is a machine learning guy, I'm a statistician. We are lacking some neuroscience expertise. So if you're a neuroscientist and interested in this endpoint, you find this interesting, please find one of us to talk to. We're particularly interested in computational neuroscientists who have familiarity with EEG and the signal processing aspects of that. So we'd be more than interested to talk to you. Please find us. Thank you.
What's your contact info?
Well, come talk to us, or you can email me, winslow.strong@gmail.com. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dorothée Lucci, and I've been coming to this meetup for about a year now. And I'm a mindfulness coach. And I've been on a journey making a virtual reality app, but on the telephone. And I've been super excited because just started alpha testing and wanted to share it with anybody who wants to take a look and maybe give me some feedback on what they see. Specifically, it's geared towards having an experience of the present moment. So less about a technique application, more about letting go, specifically thinking about anxiety, and also, thinking about after the talk tonight, this aspect of how when people are triggered or in reactivity and therefore not in their parasympathetic system, but in the sympathetic, that it becomes really important to be able to bring them back to soothe them so that they're even able to go and think clearly and go to the next step. So this is really my goal with this, is to go that very first step and provide a tool for soothing. Thanks.
Hey everybody, my name is Zach Slosher. Really happy that Mikey's been putting on these consciousness hacking groups. So remember selfemergence.com, selfemergence.com. It's an app that a business partner and I are developing. He's an executive coach, and I think this is a bit of his legacy project, trying to move his, not just his, but the methodology he uses with executive clients to a wider audience. So the app is meant to develop self-awareness, empathy, persistence and dedication, and an inspiring presence. So self-awareness, empathy, persistence, dedication, and an inspiring presence. Not to mention well-being. But those are the four, and I think those go together to be both happy and a good leader. The alpha will be done in a few weeks, so we're starting a couple peer groups that will be leadership development peer groups, lightly facilitated. They'll use the app, give us feedback, grow in the process. So if you are interested in participating, please let me know. And then longer term, we're interested in the people we want to use the app are students of lots of different kinds of coaching programs who are already into self-transformation and personal development. People who maybe aren't working with coaches either in workshops or one-on-one, but are interested in those themes as well. And then also specifically in the corporate environment, in HR departments, as an internal tool for talent development and leadership development. So selfemergence.com, talk to me here, or email me at zach@selfemergence.com. And yeah, thank you very much.
Hi guys, my name is Christine Delendo, and this is my first time here, and I've been trying to attend one of these events for a while, and just found a time today. I actually met Mike last year at a Maker Faire, but I don't think he remembers. I don't know. If I were to describe myself, I'm a spiritual, new agey, queer, vegan programmer, right? That's how I describe myself. And when I went to this meditation practice and I went on a meditation retreat, I started exploring other religions and other ways that we sort of study our consciousness and study ourselves and reaching our higher selves, our highest potential. And I realized that there's a lot of work going on around the brain, around how we think and using the brain to see how we feel. But then I learned about chakras. Does anyone here know what chakras are? Awesome. So if you didn't know, they're energy points in your body that pertain to certain types of, yourself, your communication, your security, your connection to the divine, your knowledge, your heart, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that consciousness is not only here, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's everywhere. And there was a psychic store that took an aura photo of me and gave me a diagnosis of my chakras, which was exactly the same diagnosis as, a spiritual healer, which is really interesting. And I'm interested in sort of exploring that, how we can leverage technology for our own self-assessment, our own growth, and other energy points that we're not really considering or has never really been explored. If I look at online and I Google these things, there's really not much out there. And that's why I wanted this meetup, because if you're interested in this and want to delve deep into this and how we can leverage this and how we can make it accessible to people through their phones, through a hardware device, come talk to me. I'm a programmer. I've always wanted to be an engineer, but my family of doctors, encouraged me to go to pre-med, and I dropped that. That's a whole other story. But come talk to me, because I would love to explore this idea with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Mike. Quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you're in tech or related field. Okay, awesome. Yeah, me too. Just wanted to extend an invitation to you guys. my friend Leo and I decided that we're going to take a break on a Monday, April the 6th, and we're going to do Zazen on Embarcadero by Cupid's Arrow. I don't know if you guys know where that is. So I'm a director of engineering at DocuSign. Leo is a co-founder of Buffer. So we know it's like impossible to peel away any amount of time. So we fit it in the lunch hour. Your first 30 minutes, you go grab your burrito or your sandwich, you chow it down. At 12:30, you show up at Cupid's Arrow. Hopefully there's going to be other people sitting down there, maybe looking at the water. And then you join in. And then we're just going to sit for 25 minutes. And then you got 5 minutes to hurry back to the computer land. So anyway, there's no cost. Zazen is what we're going to do because that's what we know, because we go to San Francisco Zen Center. If someone wants to lead a meditation at some future point, fantastic. But this one is just going to be standard Zen, sit and look at the water in this case. All right, so April 6th at 12 is when you get your lunch. 12:30 is when you start sit. All right.
Hi, my name is Lipa, and I'm a student. I'm studying mathematics, and I just wanted to speak very briefly kind of about that space between kind of the secular versus the spiritual. For me, studying math it's really provided like an overwhelming number of deeply, profound experiences that have really moved me in a very similar way to a lot of spiritually transformative experiences that I've had. In both cases, you're doing kind of similar things a lot of the time. You're addressing questions like, the existence of infinity, and how do you deal with that? What can you do with it? There are a lot of parallels. So recently, I started a project to kind of sort of explore that space a little bit more. I wanted to try to point others toward some of those experiences that I've had with mathematics. And I also just wanted to kind of connect with others and sort of collaborate on, where can you find insights and truths within things like math and science. So I started a project. It's called Meditations in Mathematics. In it, I basically take like math proofs and things like that. So take things sourced strictly from the just purely academic, traditional math side of things. Take a proof, break it down, pull concepts from it, and look at ways to use those concepts to shift awareness and perspective, mindfulness, thought patterns, things like that. You end up finding a lot of really similar things to the ideas and notions that you find in a lot of spiritual practices. You find concepts of overarching oneness, of expansiveness. You start to see the beauty of very different perspectives, but also how seemingly disparate ideas can all kind of point to the same larger truths. So, basically very similar themes to a lot of spiritually sourced teachings. So I'm just kind of interested in, connecting with people who might also be interested in exploring that space, and just sharing, collaborating, stuff like that. If you're interested, the website is meditationsinmathematics.com, and feel free to check it out and just kind of connect and explore. So.
Hello, my name is Gil, and I wanted to share my creation. So I'm a fan of the Buddhist Geeks. I've been listening to this podcast for a while, and I've been studying contemplative traditions and practicing for over 2 decades. And 10 years ago in an ayahuasca ceremony. I got the inspiration for this shirt, which I thought some of you might appreciate. This is my logo. And I have a website, www.sufferingsucks.com. And and right now my website's not working. I'm fixing it. So you can go on Facebook. I have a page, Suffering Sucks. So, thank you.
Thank you. Suffering does suck. I'm Amar, and I came to meditation while I was working in Burma. I was working with these AIDS patients who knew they had this terminal illness and could not get access to drugs. And after that, I worked with refugees with severe trauma. And in these populations, they're facing toxic stress, immense amounts of trauma and socioeconomic deprivation. And I thought about this idea generally. So there's a lot of wonderful technology, contemplative practices, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, massage. But how do we make this accessible for the populations that need it most? Inner city children with tremendous amounts of their peers going to juvenile detention, gunshots. How do we basically build upon our strengths and as a community work together to solve these problems? So if you're interested in that, come talk to me. And I'm also working with Ruby here, who is this wonderful visionary, and she's putting up together this project that connects people with these shared interests in circles, and it's called Heart of All Women. And if you have ideas and want to work on a cause or have an interest idea and you want to work with women around the world to collaborate, to share stories, pictures, and videos, and interviews. We're trying to think of ideas. We're trying to create these communities. So come talk to her for that, and me if you're interested in trauma and making meditation more accessible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Breeze Harper, and I came to Zen meditation via my husband 10 years ago, who figured out that I was a pretty angry person when it came to dealing with racism as a black person in this country. So since then, I've been interested in kind of fusing mindfulness practice, Zen Buddhism, and understanding, I guess, racism in a post-2000 era. And my newest project right now is really understanding how to use social media and other technologies to dismantle racism, and I'm really focusing on the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm pretty new at this, the technology part. I have a PhD in the critical race feminist part, but I really need help with collaborating with people on the technology and social media side. So in about a month, I have a conference online. I haven't actually got the technology together. I'm thinking of any meeting, but I need to figure out other tools to make this online conference something that people can benefit from. People who are clearly, they know something is wrong since Ferguson, but they don't really know what the next steps are. So this conference is kind of a mindful approach to understanding dismantling racism. And it's focused on black people, but also white allies. So how do I use these tools of mindfulness to talk about racism that isn't kind of like the white guilt and shaming way? And how can I use my Zen Buddhist practice and those principles and social media to kind of make that come together? So if people would like to talk to me about that, what their ideas may be, I'd really appreciate that. So I've got like the theory, but I need help with putting that all together. So the conference is just like the first step in what I want to do, but eventually I want to kind of merge together educational technologies, mindfulness, meditation, and dismantling racism, and like what does that look like? So thank you, and I'll be in that corner. Thanks.
Wow, what an incredible group of people that we have here. Every meetup, I'm so amazed and impressed. You guys are such incredible, amazing, wonderful people. So thank you all for coming and for being awesome. So we're going to be closing up the meetup now. And after, we're going to have time for schmoozing and socializing, and then eventually I'll kind of kick everyone out. So on the meetup side, we are thinking deeply about how to try to create an even better offering for everyone, to try to create a meetup structure, or maybe multiple meetup structures that do more than just convey information and provide people time to schmooze with each other, but really in a deep way help to create community and bring people together and help support people's projects and all of that sort of thing. And so there's a few people here in the room that are really helping with that. Nora here, Nora, you can stand up, and Vienna, who has trouble standing up because she only has one working foot. Oh, good job. And so these are two people that are really doing a wonderful job in helping to make the meetups happen. And also, is Danuta still here? Oh, Danuta is always in the back, always just ready for helping in every way imaginable. I also want to thank Peter and Dave in the back for helping with the video stuff. And Vince, our speaker, once again. And so at the end of the meetup, when we finish, we're going to put a little circle of chairs here in the front. And anyone that's interested in joining in a conversation about what they would like to see in terms of the consciousness hacking community and what they would like to see in terms of future meetups or meetings, Nora and Vienna and I are going to be sitting here with you guys, listening to your comments and ideas, and you guys can play an active role in helping to shape the future of this community. So thank you, everyone. You're all beautiful people, and the meetup is officially closed.